So this lovely herb is dandelion, Taraxacum officinale. Taraxacum comes from the Greek. Taraxos means ailment and akos means remedy. So Taraxacum, and officinale means that it was at one point in an official pharmacopoeia. It's an incredible medicinal plant. Everyone knows it as a weed, and lots of people try and get rid of it. But once you know how amazing it is, your mind will be changed. So dandelion leaf and flower and root can all be used. It's autumn now, and this is the time for harvesting the roots. And of course, when you're harvesting roots, you don't have to worry about whether it's raining or not. It's just started to drizzle a little bit of rain here. When we're harvesting flowers and leaves, and we have to make sure that we never harvest in the rain, but it doesn't matter when we're harvesting roots. You can harvest whenever the autumn comes, and with it comes the rain. So the dandelion leaves have these very, very distinctive leaf shape. So its name dandelion comes from dents de lion in French, which means teeth of the lion, and that references the very sharp serrations of the leaves. So the leaves are a really great spring vegetable. They're also a great medicinal in the springtime. They've traditionally been used as a blood cleanser. So after a long winter where people wouldn't have had any fresh vegetables, all of the food would have been preserved, a lot of it salted and preserved, people would be really in need of a spring cleanse. And the same now, you know, we have a winter where there's not much local fresh vegetables, and a spring cleanse is just what we need, and dandelions pop up in the springtime. The leaves are a little bit sour, but they're delicious in a salad. The leaves medicinally make you pee. They're a diuretic. So the magical thing about them is, often with pharmaceutical diuretics, you have to take potassium and magnesium supplements because you get depleted in those things as you excrete more urine. Dandelion leaves are loaded with potassium and magnesium. So as fast as you're peeing, you're getting replenished with potassium, which is a really good thing. So when might you need to take a diuretic? Well, diuretics are really useful whenever you've got fluid retention. So that could be hormonally related. It could be just something that you inherently tend to retain fluid. It could be related to heart disease. Any of these things where there's a tendency to, your constitution tends to retain fluid, dandelion leaf is really helpful. If you do have fluid retention, super important to find out what the cause is. So go to the doctor, go to the herbalist, find out what is the root cause of the fluid retention before you start to use the dandelion, because that's important. So dandelion leaves have a few really close lookalikes, and they also, the flowers as well, there are some really close lookalikes. And this little plant growing right next to our dandelion here is a plant called hawkspit. And it looks very much like dandelion, but you can see that the leaves are quite a bit more rounded, and they're furry and rough, whereas the dandelion leaves are quite smooth. So the backs of them look quite similar, except for this shape here. Now there are a number of these dandelion lookalikes that have various leaf shapes, and many of them have stems with numerous flowers on them. Dandelion, when it has a stem, only ever has one flower on it. These lookalikes, they tend to flower in the summertime, whereas dandelion flowers in the early spring, and it's a favorite of the bees. It's a really important bee food, actually. It comes early in the spring, just as the bees are getting going, just as they're out pollinating the fruit trees. They need food, and the dandelions are really important to them. So you can harvest the leaves then. As the summer goes on, the leaves from the dandelion become more bitter, and so it's nice to have them in the springtime. But medicinally, you can harvest them throughout the summer. The flowers are a really lovely yellow color. They're full of pollen, and I like to make a dandelion vinegar with them. So I'll get a jar of apple cider vinegar and fill it with dandelion flowers, and it makes this beautiful, bright yellow vinegar that you can sprinkle on greens to make them more, you can sprinkle it on greens And that vinegar helps with the absorption of iron and calcium from the greens. And you can make salad dressings with it. It's delicious. Adds just a little bit of sweetness to the vinegar, and it's full of nutrients. The other part of the dandelion that we use is the root. And I'm not going to dig this root up, but we have a root here that I dug up earlier, a couple of roots here. This is what the dandelion root looks like. And as you can see, when you harvest the root, if a little bit breaks off, it oozes this white latex, a white juice. And that white juice is really bitter. So if you taste it, just have a little, it's super bitter. But you'll see there, it's on my finger, really white. Now that juice, that latex, is strongly antiviral, and you can use it on warts. So if you have a wart anywhere, what I would suggest you do is soak the wart, soften it, and then paint it with dandelion. It has to be fresh. It has to be the fresh juice. You can sometimes get a bit of juice out of the leaves, but you'll get much more out of the root. You paint the wart, and if you do that for a week or so, sometimes it'll go in one application. I've had people just one application and warts that they've had for years have just disappeared. But sometimes it'll take a week or so of painting the fresh dandelion juice on it. And luckily, there should be lots of dandelions around you to be able to do that. So hopefully you'll have lots of dandelions around, so you'll be able to use it like that. Has to be fresh. So the root is a really great liver tonic. That bitterness helps to promote bile flow, and it also helps to support liver function. So where you would maybe have sluggish digestion, tendency to constipation, dandelion would be a really good thing to incorporate into your medicine. It's really good for people who tend to have a tendency to no appetite, helps to stimulate appetite. That bitterness stimulates bile flow, but it also stimulates all of the digestive juices. So it really helps to get the appetite going and get the digestion going. It's called a choleretic, and that choleretic is that increase in bile flow. Dandelion's a great thing to use if you are trying to detoxify. So, for instance, somebody who's maybe had a general anesthetic and they're wanting to help their body cleanse after that general anesthetic. It's a really great thing to incorporate. I'll often combine it with milk thistle. After a general anesthetic is not the time you want to do a cleanse per se, but this can just help your body to rid itself of the drugs. And this is the same for other pharmaceutical drugs that you're wanting to help the body detoxify from. So I'll often combine dandelion with milk thistle for that. I'll often use dandelion where there is hormonal imbalance. So I'll be using herbs to help with the hormonal imbalance. So I might be using Vitex, I might be using Alchemilla, I might be using motherwort. But I'll also be using dandelion because the liver is a really important part of hormonal balance. The liver is breaking down the hormones and helping the feedback mechanisms to stay in balance. Those feedback mechanisms get out of balance because the liver is overworked and sluggish, then you get hormonal imbalance. So really helpful with hormonal imbalance to have some dandelion. It's also really helpful in depression. So I'll always incorporate a little bit of dandelion when I'm giving someone nervines to help with depression. So a really, really useful plant. Dandelion root can also be used as a food. Some people will chop it up and roast it to make a coffee with it. You can grind it and make a coffee substitute with it, much like you do with chicory. Some people will combine chicory and dandelion root, and some people will just use roasted dandelion root as a coffee substitute. It's not so much of a food as the leaves because it has quite a bit more bitterness to it. And the level of bitterness really will depend on how dry it's been, whether you're harvesting it in the autumn or whether you're harvesting it in the spring. And the level of bitterness is also a very personal taste. Some people find bitter things, extremely bitter, and some people find them just mildly bitter. It's a very personal thing. The more bitter you find something, probably the more you need bitters, probably the more your sugar and bitter taste receptors are out of balance. So try and incorporate just a little bit more bitter foods, endives, dandelion root, dandelion leaves into your diet. Really helps digestion and helps with liver function. Dandelion root is often something that I will use for seniors whose digestion has started to slow down, become a bit more sluggish, tendency to constipation. Because dandelion root is cooling, often I'll combine it with ginger, and the dandelion and ginger together will help to warm the digestion and just give that slight laxative action. That can be really helpful. So the root can be used in a decoction. It's quite bitter, but you can use it in a decoction, which means you simmer the root. You can use it in capsules. I'll often use it in a combination with milk thistle in capsules. Sometimes I'll use it as a tincture, but not very often, and this is the reason. I'm usually giving it to support liver function. It's one of the main things as herbalists that we do, is to support liver function, because it's so important for all of the body's functioning. So when I'm trying to support and improve liver function, I don't really want to be using alcohol, because alcohol is a liver toxin. So I might use dandelion tincture, but not very often. The leaf is actually good as a tea. You can also get dandelion juice, which is a very helpful way of taking dandelion for its diuretic properties. So the only time that I would recommend you don't take dandelion root is if you have gallstones that are acting up, because with that increase in bile flow, it can actually stimulate the gallbladder, and you don't want to be expelling one of those gallstones and get it trapped in the gall duct. But it is a really good way to prevent yourself getting gallstones, because that increase in bile flow can really help to prevent gallstones being formed. So this is a herb that is really cooling, where there's digestive heat, where you see a lot of heat in the tongue, where there's redness, where there's cracking in the tongue, then you think of dandelion. I'll often combine it with other herbs, as I mentioned, milk thistle, but I might also combine it with chamomile, with ginger, with marshmallow. Depends on what I'm using it for. But yeah, very, very useful herb. When you're thinking of trying to remember what does what on the dandelion, this is my son's way of remembering it. He always says the leaves make you pee and the root makes you poo. So that's dandelion.